Goedemiddag allemaal. Allereerst bedankt voor de interesse en de getoonde interesse in het Datakeeper Cluster Edition product van SIOS. Wij hebben dit georganiseerd met het idee om te kijken naar A, introductie van het product, B, toepassingsmogelijkheden van het product. Dat kan vrij breed zijn. Met betrekking tot vragen wil ik bij deze aangeven of jullie die eventueel via de chat willen gaan ingeven. Dan zullen we die aan het einde van het webinar voor zover als mogelijk en de tijd dat toelaat behandelen. Verder hebben we nog een verzoek, zeker voor de mensen die FT Systems al kennen, maar bijvoorbeeld nog niet volgen via LinkedIn. Wij zouden het heel prettig vinden, gezien wij heel actief bezig zijn om nieuws naar buiten te brengen via LinkedIn, om ons te volgen via LinkedIn. Zoek even op LinkedIn naar bedrijfsnaam FT Systems, klik even op volgen en je wordt netjes op de hoogte gehouden van de nieuwtjes, activiteiten. En dan kun je daar ook op reageren of vragen stellen als die uit mogen komen. Verder hebben we ook nog een soort van een cadeautje voor de mensen die deelnemen. Alleen dat ga ik aan het eind van het webinar naar buiten brengen. Het gaat wel richting het product waar we het nu over gaan hebben. Dus mochten er daarna onduidelijkheden, vragen zijn, stel ze graag. Ik zal ze zo spoedig als mogelijk proberen te beantwoorden. Harry.
Hello.
Hi, Harry. I just did a small introduction. You can start to take over the presentation. I'm going to give you control now. If you have 1 moment,
Okay.
please. Thank you.
No problem. So, can you see my screen?
Yes. Thank you very much.
Sales and pre-sales director at SIOS Technology. As you can guess from my accent, I'm based in the UK. I'm going to apologize in advance. The rest of this presentation will be in English, but that's largely because your English is most likely better than my Dutch. So it's probably a better way to go for this presentation. Joining me is my colleague, Michael Trout. Michael is one of our senior solutions architects based over in the Boston area in the US. He's kindly joining us this afternoon to help with a demonstration that we want to show you slightly later on in the session. So I'll let Michael introduce himself later on when he comes online to do the demo. I want to say thank you to the team at Rackscope for organising this webinar for us. We at SIOS Technology are experts in application availability. We've been doing this for quite some time. Part of the way we work, particularly in the EMEA territories, is to work very closely with partners such as Rackscope, who are our distribution partner for the region, and they very kindly organised this webinar for us to speak with you today. So the idea today is just to talk a little bit about who SIOS Technology are. We want to talk a little bit about what we're doing with some of our solution set today. The particular solution we want to talk about today is something that we call Datakeeper Cluster Edition. And I'll dive more into sort of what that solution is and what it's delivering in a few slides' time. But before we dive into that, I thought it's good just to build a picture of who we are and the market that we are working in today. So SIOS has actually been around for quite some time. We came to the market in 1999, and back in those days, we were a company called Steel-Eye Technology. And some of you may be familiar with that name. Steel-Eye back in the day were experts in Linux clustering. That was really where our expertise lied back in those days. But over the years, our clustering capabilities have now also moved on to include Windows technologies, which we'll talk about a bit later on. The company is based out of San Mateo in California. That's where our headquarters are. Most of our executive team are actually based in the Boston area in the United States, just where Michael is based. But we do have global coverage. You know, in addition to the US, we also have an additional US office. support and engineering centers are in Lexington, South Carolina. We have an office in the UK where I'm based, and I manage all of our EMEA sales and pre-sales activities. We also have a good presence in Asia Pac as well. We've got an office in Singapore, and we also have good presence in Japan as well. So we're actually a Japanese company. We're owned by SIOS Technology Inc., who are our parent company based in Tokyo, and as the subsidiary of that organization, we are SIOS Technology Corp, headquartered out of the US. As I mentioned earlier, we have a very good track record in high availability solutions. We currently have more than 60,000 licenses installed globally across a wide range of industry sectors. And a lot of our success has largely come down to the kind of partners that we play with as well. Now, as you can see on the slide in front of you, you've got a good example of some of the partners that we work with today. So the slide here just illustrates some of the companies and customers that we've helped over the years. And all of the organizations you see here on the screen are actually all European customers. We have a much wider customer base, obviously globally, but these are some of the customers we've helped, particularly in this region. But as you can see from this screen, we don't particularly focus on any specific industry sectors. We will help a customer, no matter which sector they're from, we will help a customer with whatever high availability requirement that they have. So you'll see from the screen there's some very sort of well-known names there, some maybe not so well-known. Some of these customers are customers we've helped with Raxco and the team there. I'm sure they can talk about some of these customers in detail at a later time. But really, this is just a flavour of the kind of customers we work with and the kind of industry sectors we've touched to date. So, what do we do? Summarise what we do very quickly, just to give you a flavour of where this presentation is going to go. So what SIOS are very good at doing, if you look at our solution set today, we're very good at protecting and optimising business critical workloads in what we refer to as the new data center. So over the last decade, if you look at sort of the emergence of virtualized computing and very much today cloud computing, these kind of technologies really offer key benefits for customers in terms of reducing cost and improving IT agility and flexibility. We've seen lots of companies move away from the old traditional data center made up of physical servers and move to what we refer to as the new data center, where you find yourself using this combination of physical, virtual, and cloud environments. The new data center gives IT the flexibility to deploy and configure their applications in a way that actually best meets their business needs. This flexibility, it allows them to change and adapt much faster to new business requirements. Now, from a SIOS standpoint, it's very important that our product set and our solutions today also match this evolution as well and give customers the expected levels of agility and flexibility when it comes to doing these kind of migrations. So we have a solution set that fits all of these kinds of environments, and you'll see that in some of the upcoming slides. When we look at our product, what we're delivering is the ability to run SAN or SAN-less clusters for physical, virtual, and cloud environments, as I mentioned in the previous slide. And looking specifically at the products we have today, very simply, we have a range of high availability products in our portfolio. And the one key question we ask our customers when we go to speak to them is it Windows or is it Linux? And that's fundamentally really the only important question, because from that point on, we've got a solution that can help. From a Windows standpoint, we have our flagship product, which we call Datakeeper Cluster Edition, and that's the product we're going to talk about today. So I'll put some subsequent slides on that particular product. Not all of our customers are running Windows. A lot of customers need some sort of clustering requirement for Linux, and we also have a Linux clustering product as well. That's actually a conversation for another time. We're not talking about the Linux product today, but if anyone is interested in that, please do let us know. We can come back and speak to you about that. But regardless of what you're doing, whether it's Windows or whether it's Linux, what we're giving the customer is realistically the freedom to choose what they want to do, depending on what their environment looks like. We can deploy on any server configuration, whether it's physical, virtual, or cloud, or a combination of all three. When it comes to storage, we're completely agnostic. Whether you're running an existing SAN or whether you want to run in a SAN-less fashion to reduce the cost and complexity of managing your storage, we can support both configurations. And from a geography standpoint, we can support you whether you're just running local high availability in a data center, whether you want to run across multiple data centers, or whether you want to run a full disaster recovery solution. Whatever combination you or your customers are looking at, we can generally support them. So why do SIOS focus so heavily on high availability clustering? It's a very, very big market, but from a technology standpoint, it's very simplistic. Everyone understands high availability clustering. It's available for most applications, so there's very little scripting involved in deploying a high availability cluster. You have flexible high availability of DR configurations. You can minimize your downtime because the level of availability these solutions give you is very, very good. You have integrated application monitoring, especially when you're running things like server, for example, in a Windows cluster. You have a very large pool of trained cluster administrators out there. There's a very large knowledge base out there who understand clustering, whether it's Windows clustering or Linux clustering. High performance, low overhead, predictable levels of service, and very importantly, it's scalable as well. You can add nodes to your cluster as and when your business grows as well. And of course, you can have clustering solutions for both Windows and Linux. So that clustering market, on its own, is actually a very sizable market. Some of the analysis we did a short while ago, when we look at the whole clustering market, it's currently worth about $2.5 billion. That's a huge market to focus on. So it's a very popular solution. If you take just the Windows and Linux piece of that market, that's still $1.5 billion. So it's a well-established and ever increasingly growing market. This is one of the core reasons why SIOS have decided to focus around this kind of clustering segment in the high availability sector. What SIOS bring to the table, it brings this unique ability to enable customers to easily move their clusters from a physical environment or a virtualization environment over to a cloud environment. Once we've done that migration for you, we can then manage the availability of your mission critical applications once they're on the cloud. And we'll highlight how we do that in the subsequent slides. So what we do is we're protecting those tier 1 applications with our SAN and SAN-less clustering configuration. The product we're going to focus on today is something that we call Datakeeper Cluster Edition. And as the name suggests, this is a technology that is designed to integrate with a Windows Server failover cluster. So if you're someone who already knows your Microsoft clustering, your failover clustering, you will be very familiar with what we're doing here. This will be a very, very simple concept to grasp. And I'll explain further in the following slides. In parallel to that, we do have some alternative solutions. We have a solution called the SIOS Protection Suite. We have a Windows flavor of this solution for customers who are not using failover clustering. So what we're doing with our Windows product is providing the full stack cluster solution, which covers the Windows piece. And then we also have a Linux equivalent of this solution, where again, we're providing the full stack clustering and data replication for your Linux-based applications as well. So they're essentially the products that we're positioning today from a high availability standpoint. Now, SAN-less clustering technologies, we take the local storage that you have available to you in your cluster nodes, and we deploy and configure our software in a way where we can get the storage to act like it's a SAN. And this provides with a very vast configuration flexibility, because essentially you're removing the requirement for a SAN, so you're actually removing the cost and complexity involved with running a SAN. So very quickly, we're dramatically lowering the cost for protecting your applications. The technology is also very useful where shared storage is just simply not possible. And the prime deployment in that kind of category is, the prime example is the cloud platform. You can't run shared storage. So the formula we sort of take to our customers is if you're running Windows Server, you're running a Windows-based application, and you combine it with Datakeeper Cluster Edition, you can actually deploy a SAN-less cluster. And there's a number of benefits for deploying a SAN-less cluster. Anyone who understands clustering will be familiar with what a traditional cluster looks like. And this could be a Windows cluster, this could be a Linux cluster. Yeah, the concepts are the same. You normally have 2 or more nodes sitting in your cluster, which are managing the application availability piece for your application. All of these nodes are generally attached to some level of shared storage. Now, from an application perspective, this is a very highly available solution. However, from a storage standpoint, we have a single point of failure. If for whatever reason we lose our shared storage, we've pretty much lost our application. It doesn't matter how many nodes we've got in our cluster, it doesn't matter how many times we can fail over. If we've lost the storage, we've lost the cluster. So one of the approaches that SIOS likes to take is we want to try and eliminate any single point of failure in this architecture. So what we do is we recommend running a cluster without relying upon a SAN. And instead of using a SAN, we rely upon the local storage available to us within each of the cluster nodes. And we take away the SAN and we're replacing this storage with a replication job. Because we're now running separate sets of storage, we need to ensure that the data is synchronized between these cluster nodes. Now, the replication engine that we deploy is a very efficient replication engine. It allows you to replicate either synchronously or asynchronously, depending upon what your environment will allow. It's a low latency block level replication engine that operates between the 2 server nodes. And it's a very easy replication engine to manage. Now, what happens at this stage is we're still running a Windows Server failover cluster. The Windows Server failover cluster is still managing the availability of my application. In this example, it's SQL Server. So all that happens in this scenario is if node 1 fails, SQL Server just fails over to node 2 as in the same way it would in a normal Windows Server failover cluster. There's nothing different. When the primary node comes back online, we can start replicating any changes that were made during the failover process while it was in the failover mode back to the original node. Again, that could be done synchronously or asynchronously. So it's a very, very easy concept. We're still utilizing failover clustering from Microsoft. We're eliminating the requirement for a SAN. Again, same example. Instead of a SQL cluster, this one happens to be a file cluster. It's being deployed in a SAN-less fashion. We're running a Datakeeper replication job between nodes. And if node 1 fails, the file services just fail over to node 2. Exactly the same as before. So when it comes to failover clustering, the solution is very, very simple. It integrates very nicely with a failover cluster. Generally, as I said earlier, if you're someone who's already familiar with failover clustering, you'll already know 99% of the solution. The day-to-day management of the solution can be done through the failover cluster console. You'll see some of that when Michael does the demo. So again, we're using a console which is very familiar to cluster administrators. So taking that concept, we see customers deploying our solutions in different ways. We see that simple 2-node deployment that I've just shown you in the previous diagrams. We see customers deploying what we call a multi-site cluster with a hybrid cloud. This is a scenario where the customer is already running a cluster with a SAN. They've already invested money and time in their SAN, so they're utilizing that on their primary site, but they realize that that's a single point of failure, and they still need some sort of level of disaster recovery, just in case the cluster at the local site goes down. So in Datakeeper, we can replicate to a 3rd server off-site, and that 3rd server can either be at the DR site, or as in the diagram illustrates here, it could actually be in the cloud. So this is something that we call a multi-site cluster with hybrid cloud, and this is a common deployment. We see many of our customers running this kind of deployment. But realistically, there's very few configuration limitations when you're deploying Datakeeper. If you're running a physical failover cluster, we can deploy our software on physical servers. We can remove the SAN and operate the cluster in the way I just explained in the previous slides. We could do the multi-site environment, like I just explained. You could be a customer who's already running a cluster, but needs some level of disaster recovery protection for that cluster. A lot of our customers go with this other hybrid cloud option where they're running a Datakeeper cluster. They've already not relied on a SAN. They're running a SANless cluster on site for high availability. But again, they're adding a third node to the cluster, which is sitting in the cloud. And we can support that deployment as well. We can also help customers who are running virtualization platforms. If you're a VMware customer, we can run a Datakeeper within your cluster, within your cluster nodes at a guest. If you're a Hyper-V customer, we can do it at a guest and a host. Because at the end of the day, the host is still a Windows machine which we can run. We have some customers who actually don't have an availability requirement. They use our technology from a high performance requirement. Some customers find the performance on their SAN to be very slow for their application. So they decide to remove the SAN and they utilize high-speed flash storage in each of their cluster nodes, and then use Datakeeper to manage the replication and the data synchronization between these customers. So that's another common use case we see. But by far the most common use case we're seeing today is customers taking our technology and running a full Windows Server failover cluster where all the nodes are completely in the cloud. And the reason why our technology is very suited for this kind of deployment is because, as you're probably aware, cloud infrastructures today do not support shared storage. It's just completely impossible. So to take our SANless capabilities and apply this to the cloud, it's just actually an ideal match. And we are working very closely with a lot of the cloud vendors today in deploying exactly this type of solution. So let's look at the cloud part of it in a bit more detail and just sort of explain what exactly is going on. Our technology, it makes clusters cloudable. Yeah, as I've just mentioned, traditional failover clustering requires shared storage, and shared storage is not available in public clouds. Now, as we know with SIOS technology, we can take a SANless cluster and we can operate a cluster without having to rely on SAN. So our SANless clustering technology presents cloud storage to a failover cluster that allows it to operate as though it was a SAN. And this is a big part of our business today. We're seeing many customers taking their failover clusters, migrating them to cloud platforms like Azure and AWS with our technology, and then using our technology to maintain high availability for that cluster once it's running on the cloud. The failover and data protection principles from a SIOS perspective are exactly the same in the cloud as they are if you're running in a physical or virtual environment. There's nothing different from a SIOS perspective. So the failover mechanism and the data replication mechanism I explained earlier is exactly the same. So in AWS, as an example, we have a 2-node SQL cluster. To eliminate the single point of failure, we've separated the SQL nodes to run across separate availability zones. And then we've set up a file share witness in the middle to act as our arbitrator for the cluster. So we've got a majority mode in our cluster. The replication runs exactly the same way. You can run synchronous or asynchronous block level replication between your servers. The Windows Server failover cluster is still responsible for managing the SQL Server failover and failback in exactly the same way the SQL cluster would do normally. So we see a lot of this deployment. We work very closely with Amazon today. If you go to the AWS, you can see our solutions on their marketplace. We are certified with them. We actually work very closely with a lot of their solution architects for deployments around the EMEA territory. The same configuration and principle also applies to Azure. There is nothing, again, we have a 2-node SQL cluster. We've separated the cluster nodes across fault domains, which is the same terminology, same concept as availability zones in AWS. And we're running replication between the nodes. The SQL cluster is still managing the availability of the SQL application. We've set up a cloud witness in this scenario to act as our majority node. Anyone who's familiar with Azure will know you have a cloud witness service that you can deploy, and we can work with that cloud witness to act as the majority node in the cluster. From a Microsoft perspective, again, we do work very, very close in terms of our Azure-based solution. At the moment, we are the only certified Windows clustering solution on Azure. We're on the Azure marketplace, and Microsoft have also certified our solution for Azure, specifically for SAP. So if anyone's familiar with SAP, you'll know that's quite a heavy-duty application. And generally, if you can get a certification on an application like SAP, it pretty much stands you in good stead when protecting other applications on this platform as well. So this whole certification process is fully documented, authored and posted by Microsoft. So if you Google that, you will find it. And again, our products are available on their marketplace as well. So at this point, that was a very, very brief overview of the technology and what some of the potential that it can have and some of the areas that we're working on with the technology. I think at this point, it would be good if I hand over to Michael. I'll let Michael introduce him to everyone, himself to everyone, and he can run through a short demonstration and give you a flavor of what the solution looks like.
Okay, thank you, folks, and thanks, Harry, for that introduction to the technology. So we'll start with a little overview of what we're going to see. Right now, on my MacBook, I have virtual machines running just to show the efficiency of the replication and the product itself. So this is actually running inside VirtualBox on my Mac with all of these hosts. So I have a SQL 1, which is my primary cluster node currently. It owns the SQL cluster resource, SQL Server. I also have SQL 2 in the background, and SQL 2 is my target. And it is running along happily. And then I have a third node to match the use case. Wrong node, that's my jump box. I have a third node to match the use case of being able to easily replicate to any other node, not just a cluster. So we have a lot of customers that because of their challenges with the cost of their backup solutions or just simply the I/O can't handle it, some customers are actually replicating to a third node to perform an entire SQL dump for backups, right? It's not the optimal way in current technology, but there are some customers also making this third copy just to run reports on because they don't want to bother the production nodes, right? So that's where SIOS-3 is, and you notice there's no SQL in that name. All right, we'll go full screen now. Let me just minimize my control panel so it's out of the way. And now we should be full screen seeing Failover Cluster Manager. So this window should be familiar to most, and you notice there's really nothing special going on here. It's traditional Windows Failover Cluster Manager. Both of my nodes are up and happy. I go into storage, and then you'll see something slightly unique. There's a Datakeeper volume that's presented to it. This is the intersection point between the SIOS Datakeeper Cluster Edition and the Failover Cluster Manager. And the properties here that exist are actually API integrated directly into the Failover Cluster Manager with Windows APIs. So no matter what happens in terms of managing a cluster using the traditional Windows GUI, the Datakeeper volume will do as it is supposed to do for failover, for failback, pausing any type of cluster service. It is completely integrated with the opportunity also to map dependencies to whatever is using this resource, right? So a lot of SQL build-outs will have a number of services, and maybe some of those services will use a specific drive, and other services will use other drives. So all the dependency relationships keep the API automation happy, and no matter what happens in FCM, it'll propagate down. At the same rate, if I use the Datakeeper GUI to make changes, it will instantly update all of those dependencies up the stack of the Windows failover cluster manager. So as far as the seamless integration, it is just that, right? In most cases, people are not in the Datakeeper GUI managing things. They manage their cluster the way they've always managed their cluster, with the exception of they don't have to call the data center admin to you know, make storage changes, etc. Especially in the cloud, because there isn't one there. But this level of synchronous mirroring is at the block level, which makes it very efficient. And as Harry mentioned, there's a bitmap file that's shared between all copies of whatever volumes are being replicated, whether it's a one-to-one replication for HA or any number of the HA cluster nodes, or that third copy that I mentioned earlier. All of those copies would have the bitmap file updated and synchronized between all of the players involved. So in terms of the roles here, so SQL right now is on SQL 1. And just to sort of start being mean to this environment, I'm going to actually fail this over to SQL 2. And at the same time, as soon as I click go, I will go and take a look at, right now, my source is SQL 1 for my copy. Now, this is the HA pair that my mouse is over on right now. And then that third copy I mentioned is here. So once the GUI refreshes, which will take a second, need to go off and back. It's still pending. Okay, there it goes. You notice it went to not mirrored for a moment, and it is flipping over the active volume. So, of course, this is running on my MacBook with many virtual machines, so it might be a little slower than normal. But you notice what happened here. Interestingly enough, as expected, my cluster pair, the SQL volume S on SQL 1 and SQL 2, now SQL 2 is the owner of this volume. If we go back to Failover Cluster Manager, you can see that it's reporting the owner node is SQL 2. Interestingly enough, remember that third copy I mentioned? I never touched this mirror. It knew that SQL 2 is now the owner, and it automatically updated that third copy as another part of its sort of rule set and awareness of what's going on. Outside of that, I'll fill this back in the meantime as we run through some other possible use cases, which Harry mentioned earlier. You'll notice there's a couple other replications going on here. So I can replicate any volume. It doesn't have to be a SQL instance. There are many integration points with file systems and even homegrown applications. The product doesn't stop at Windows either. We can go across to the Linux platform and many other application types. So, and in the background, of course, my SQL 1 is now the owner of the volume again. So that was good and great. That proves that our API is talking to the Microsoft Failover Cluster Manager. And you notice I didn't really have to do anything in the Datakeeper GUI, and that's the point I'm trying to make clear here. It's just business as usual, right? So let's be a little meaner. I like breaking things, especially in having a SIOS protection in the background. So in this case, that volume S drive is actually on disk 1. So I'm going to be a little rancid, if you will, and I'm going to take this disk offline. So as I take the disk offline, you're going to see it updating. Uh-oh, something is happening. SQL 1 was the owner, but I just killed that disk in a mean way. Now I'll take a look at, oh, see, the SQL 1 is already realizing that something very bad happened. And this GUI will refresh and flip back to SQL 2, just as if I did the manual switch over. So the failover is pending. It's getting the services thrown over through a cluster management. And just as we saw before, the source volumes will now get updated. And you can see it in action here in cleaning up the old data. And now SQL 2 is the master. And you noticed a state became resyncing. And at that very little slice of time, it just made sure that the bitmap files were updated and the mirroring state was healthy again for that third copy. So you also notice here, I have a big red X, and red X's are not good, but that's because I cannot mirror this set because I killed the disk, right? So let's get that back into the loop and bring that disk back online. Once that disk is online, we should see resync occurring. Now, there are settings in the background that I can have automatic resync or I can have it manual. Because sometimes if you have a temporary condition like a DR copy or something to that extent, you can actually set the product to manually resume normal operation in synchronization. So now I'm back in the mirroring state because I brought the disk online. I didn't have to touch anything. That's the whole cluster awareness. And in the meantime here, my cluster should be healthy again. So I'll get back to SQL 1 again, just to get things back to where they're happy. And while that runs, we will again watch the GUI. There are a number of interesting points that I can collect. We have an EMCMD CLI that can collect any job information that's related to any of the Datakeeper layers, including which hosts are involved, what volumes are involved, which jobs are these replication jobs in, what resources do those have. If I go into the job overview screen here, it sort of dumps out the known data, and this is a great place to say, well, let me take a look at what is out there as available, as opposed to look at the job level in the reports. Or in the server overview, I see a summary of all of the volumes I have involved and what their roles are. And you can see I have, the payroll volume as in addition to the third copy for the SQL S drive, and this is just a representation of my whole build out for this for these three nodes. So in that in itself, I can run through. There's an MSI installer. You can automate this. A lot of people put the SIOS Datakeeper Cluster Edition in their server builds for HA purposes and have it ready to go. It's very simple install. There's nothing to really tweak or handle. The only hard rule is that there's some level of administrator running in the Datakeeper service, and that's about the extent of it. The other rule here is the same block size and the same drive size should be utilized between any of the members of a replication job. It can be larger as a target, but typically all that slack space is lost. But that's about the only exceptions that truly occur. It reports in Event Viewer with a list of events so that awareness can propagate naturally, just like any other Windows service would. Are there any questions right now for that?
Michael, I did not see any questions yet in the chat box. I just asked people if all was clear through the chat box. There's no response at this moment. So for now, all is clear.
Good, good. And this is expected in my mind. And it really shows the elegance of the solution, right? This solution is not extremely difficult. And even in the Linux world, we are out there everywhere because it's just simple, right? We take the complexities away from needing to set up and turn a lot of knobs. This product's been out there for a decade plus, so it's not something new that needs a lot of patching and a lot of hand holding. But at the same time, we're already qualified with Server 2016 and the SQL Solution 2016. So we're really keeping up with the times across all of the platforms, not just Windows, but also your major CentOS, Red Hat, Oracle Red Hat, and of course the majority of those applications. Now, if you have a special customer that perhaps made their own little application, you can use a Windows protection suite, which will enable you to sort of create your own cluster management solution for that application. So keep that in mind. It's a little bit more of doing because you have to take control of the services involved and things like this. So maybe some light scripting to get it to work. But as you can see here, the data replication and reporting up, I mean, it just works. So as you can imagine, our management experience in the Linux side to manage the entire cluster is also possible in the Windows platform. But in the majority of cases, we use the Datakeeper Cluster Edition and let the Windows Failover Cluster Manager do its job. So that's the summary. Harry, did you want me to show anything else in terms of the Datakeeper Cluster Edition environment?
No, thanks for that, Michael. I think that's a great demonstration. Really appreciate that. That was a really good demo. If you can put me back into presenter mode, please, and I'll wrap up with a few slides.
Will do. You're back, Harry.
So, can you see me?
Yes.
Yeah, great, brilliant. We do have a number of customers out there today who are using our technology in a wide variety of formats. We've got small 2-4 node cluster deployments out there, which is very, very common for us. But we also do have some larger sizable deployments as well. And one of our biggest use cases at the moment are protecting applications like SAP. We're actually involved in one of the largest SAP deployments in Azure at the moment. We've got a customer down in New Zealand, Zespri Kiwi Fruits, or a distributor of Kiwi Fruits, who are running, at the last count, up to 32 nodes on an SAP environment in the cloud. And this is all being protected by SIOS Datakeeper. It was actually Datakeeper that allowed them to do the migration into Azure, and then they carried on using Datakeeper for the availability piece of the SIOS, of the SAP clusters. So that's a customer we have running our solution today. He's running 20 nodes across 2 data centers, and the requirement here was to provide a DR site for their SQL clusters. So this is a customer who sort of needed synchronized replication between the cluster nodes. They wanted to improve their RTOs and RPOs and improve their cost efficiency, and came across Datakeeper to help them do that. A very sizable customer in the US who's taken their whole SAP deployment on Linux and moved it into AWS. So what they did was they looked at our Linux products and decided to use our Linux products to do this migration. Very importantly for this customer, they needed a solution that was certified by SAP. And our Linux products are certified by SAP, which is very important for a lot of our customers. And they wanted to make sure that they had a good level of high availability once they were on the AWS cloud with their SAP. They went out and did their homework, did their research, found SIOS Datakeeper to be, SIOS and SIOS Solutions to be one of the few technologies out there that is certified for SAP and decided to move forward with us. So that was a very sizable project that we worked on earlier this year. It's about other mission critical applications as well. Here we've got a customer who had an EMS application up to 30 nodes that they wanted to move into AWS again. And again, they wanted to work with a vendor that knew how to do this migration and was able to support their availability requirements once they were in the cloud. This time an SAP customer using Hyper-V and Azure. So this was an example where there was a hybrid cloud configuration going on. Again, they needed something that was SAP certified. Again, they found themselves with some the migration and the availability control. And the story continues. They're the kind of customers when we're helping today. The customer is running Oracle servers and wanted to move into AWS and Windows, and again found that one of the few solutions that could do this for them was SIOS Datakeeper. They were running an older application and found that their SAS software was not compatible with some of the Oracle solutions, Oracle failsafe. So that's one of the reasons why they came to SIOS to help them with their older application. So we're seeing lots and lots of customers move into this kind of area where they're technicians and they're now beginning to move them into the cloud, whether it's AWS, whether it's Azure. We're also beginning to work with Google Cloud as well. So if there's anyone out there who's working with GCP, we can certainly help you from that standpoint. But there's a lot more of this migration going on. We're really beginning to see a lot of it around Europe, and I'm hoping we can sort of help some customers around the Netherlands as well with this kind of requirement. That's pretty much it from our side. I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time out to join us. And if there's any other questions, please do come forward and ask your questions. We're happy to answer them. But for the moment, I'll hand back to Sean.
Thank you very much, Harry. Thank you for presenting the info we wanted to present. Als er uiteraard nog vragen zijn, dan lijkt het me goed om die eventjes naar ons toe te sturen. Dat kan naar support@raxco.nl. Mochten er nog vragen zijn, hebben jullie informatie nodig? Bel ons eventjes. Een vriendelijk woord per telefoon is zo gedaan. 085 489 4904. Ook ik wil jullie allen hartelijk bedanken voor de deelname. Ik hoop dat iedereen genoten heeft van dit webinar. Je kunt het ons ook volgen op LinkedIn, zoals ik in het begin al had aangegeven. En wij horen graag van jullie in welke vorm dan ook. Dank jullie wel.